So, walking games. Yeah, I've never really been a fan of them. While they nail things on the head like Atmosphere, just look at Dear Esther, what really turns me off towards them is how cryptic and vague their stories can be. Although, thankfully enough, all these opinions changed once I played What Remains of Edith Finch. It's a 2017 walking game, or rather, I'll be more polite, adventure game that came out in April. And considering the month where it got released, I can see how it went under my radar. The game is about America's most unfortunate family and how a curse is the reason for their numerous deaths. You play as Edith Finch, the last of the family line, who ventures forth into the family home to understand more about her unique family. I wanted to talk about the two parts of the games that really impacted me, which would have been Lewis's and Walter's storylines. And since Walter's story comes up first, we'll start with him. His storyline directly ties with the previous storyline in the game, which was Barbara Finch's. In the game, she was a former child actress who had lost all her fame as she went to her teens, and was seeking to relive some of that lost fame by performing her signature scream at the BeastieCon. Oh man, a whole 21 years before their debut. While practicing her scream, she hears one downstairs, but it just turns out to be her dad after cutting his hand on a saw. She goes back upstairs to practice her screaming with her boyfriend again, only to hear a loud rumbling from the basement. She heads down there to confront it, but it only turns out to be her boyfriend, in spooky mask and all. Quick side note, I really like how this part plays. Moving from panel to panel with the Halloween theme playing in the background is really cheesy, but in a good way. And visually, this part of the game sorta reminds me of the game 13, with the only difference being those thick and messy outlines. During this sequence of the game, there's a lot of reports of a gang and a hookman roaming the town, with the hookman unfortunately making his way into the Finch home. Although Barbara beats the everlasting daylight out of him and then he promptly disappears. Although, this doesn't spell a good ending for Barbara when a bunch of different monsters come up to surprise her and seemingly eat her. The only thing left of her is her ear and that music box her father built. A lot of this is fictional, but Barbara's death isn't, and I think you can assume that her boyfriend's the one who killed her, probably from a bout of rage when she hit him. He's never seen again after he hits Barbara, so he most likely ran off so he wouldn't get caught. But during everything that happened at night, there was still one other person in that house, and that was Walter. He heard everything going on in the house that night, and he probably knows what truly happened to Barbara, with her death traumatizing him. Since Walter's mother, Edie, had such an interest of the curse, or better described an obsession over it, she put a lot of the reason for the family deaths on it, keeping the idea of the curse alive. Constantly knowing about the curse and dealing with the death of his sister caused Walter to have an extreme fear of the curse and by extension anything around him. To assure his protection, Walter created a bunker with tons of food under the house to live out his days. When I first played this part, I thought Walter was on a train going somewhere for a split second. This is because of the periodical rumbling the area would get from time to time, coupled with the cramped looking area he sits in. But oh, silly me, this isn't the case. That rumbling or shaking that happens precisely at 12 is the monster that gives reason to Walter staying in his bunker. It gives him assurance that something is always outside there, when it's just a train that passes by under his house. But over time, Walter grew used to it as it grew into his daily routine. Wake up, sit down, wait for the rumbling or the possibility of death, eat peach, and hope everything's the same the next day. While it still keeps him in a state of fear, knowing that it appears at the same time each day keeps his sanity in check. I'm pretty sure if that rumbling happened at random times during the day, he would lose his sanity, constantly on edge, waiting for the next strike when he least expects it, and probably dying in the bunker from just paranoia alone. After decades of growing used to this cycle, in 2005 that rumbling that came at the same time every day stopped, and it stopped for a whole week. After decades and decades of being afraid of the curse, this one week it seemed like the curse might have missed him. Seeing that this was his chance, Walter goes out to the lower level of the bunker, still carrying the fear of the curse and what it's done to his siblings. He questions to himself if getting out of the bunker is even a good idea, but he ultimately reaffirms his previous feelings of getting out and breaks himself out. After 30 years of closing himself off from the world, Walter finally gets out, seeing his first glimpse of the world through a tunnel. With whatever time he has left, he's ready to appreciate and take on whatever's going to come at him. But that rumbling that he heard all those years was a train, and sadly he came out at a time when the train was running too late. And after saying that he could feel the sun on his face, Walter dies. The irony and sadness of his story is brutal. You have someone who rejected everything in the world because of a made-up curse his mother kept alive for years. It was so bad, in fact, that he thought the rumbling underneath him was the curse ready to get him, but really it was just a train. It is already kind of weird that a train passes by under their house, but considering what kind of family they are, I think you can believe that. If you go back to Edie's room in the game, which is also Walter's mother, there's a paper she's kept where she gave an interview about a mole man under the house. The thing is, she knew that Walter was under the house hiding from everything, and knowing that she would just lie for some kind of local fame or just to keep the curse alive is so unfortunate and shows how bad of a mother she is. I mean, she periodically did bring food to him, but wouldn't you want to help your son out? I know there's other food down there, but man, don't you think your son would get tired of being fed freaking peaches? Edith herself didn't know that Walter was down there, so they could have just come up with any wild assumptions about what happened to him, at least to younger family members. Maybe if Edie didn't leave her son to her own devices, he would still be alive. And this is a small tidbit, but I really love how Walter said, it's a nice little detail. I mean, obviously anyone would get tired of eating the same thing every day, but goddamn those peaches. And that was Walter's story. It's so unfortunate he didn't have the time to experience what the world could offer him. Although his story was really deep, Lewis's story really struck a chord with me. Not only story-wise, but gameplay-wise too. If you explored the kitchen first in the game, all you really know about Lewis is that he worked in a cannery and that he's Edith's brother. For a while, I thought Lewis was kind of your classic outdoorsman, or something related to that because of the cannery job. Even though I thought this a bit less going through the game, when you get to his room, you see that he lives in a friggin' boat, and I was thinking to myself, wow, this is slightly a pun and Lewis is gonna sleep with the fishes, I'm gonna lose it. Once you open his door, you immediately get what kind of person he is. You're greeted with neon, dank, video games, and the best damn part of this game. It begins when you open a letter sent to Dawn by a psychiatrist talking about Lewis's treatment for his substance abuse. And right after it fades into the next shot, I already knew what was going to happen at the end of this part, and this is by just looking at the blade to the right and seeing how everyone else died in the game. Knowing this, however, didn't prepare me for what kind of ride I'd be put on for this part of the game. What you'll be doing here is cutting fish, while the psychiatrist speaks about Lewis's mind wandering on the job. And once he mentions his mind wandering, a fog with a person in the middle of it appears, and you can move it. Yep, you're going to be playing two different games at once. One hand controlling Lewis in his head, and the other one controlling Lewis at the cannery. It was a little hard for me to get the hang of it at first, but you start to slowly get into the routine of it. While we're in Lewis's head, his daydreaming grows larger and larger, and gets more detailed as shown in the blob on the left of the screen. I really like how detailed his daydreaming gets, and how the space of it gets larger and larger only to take up the whole screen in the end. But what's playing out here is Lewis slowly rejecting and distancing himself from reality, and diving deeper and deeper into his daydreaming. He created a band, became mayor of his own town, and even set out to adventure to new lands. All while he stayed standing at a cannery, cutting fish. He was so into his own mind that when his mother came to tell him to come home, he really wasn't there anymore. But he was still cutting fish, and better than before. At least that's what his boss said. Before Lewis's story starts, there's an Indian flag that hangs on his wall, which shows how much pride he takes in being part Indian. I like how this is reflected through the Sanskrit written on the lands he's traveling through, and how you can choose between a harp or a centaur as the instrument that Lewis's prince or queen was playing. For me, I chose centaur every time I played because I thought it sounded really cool. After Lewis's long journey, he reaches his destination, with his fantasy taking over the whole screen, and with you still cutting fish, of course. At this point, Lewis wasn't really giving any attention to what was going on around him. He only gave focus to his imagination, where things were just better. It wasn't some cannery job he had to do. After he opens the door into the palace, it cuts back to the cannery. Before you enter the main floor, you can see a gaming device, or a Switch without the Joy-Cons, and his weed and psychedelic posters. You can really tell that he brought a part of himself to work. As you walk down to the end of the main hallway, you see Lewis doing the motions of cutting up fish, when there's none there. At this point, Lewis the cannery worker and Lewis as he desires to be were two different people. The Lewis as he desired to be, or rather Lewis the king, hated the world he was previously in, but hated Lewis the cannery man even more. As you walk up the conveyor belt, you return back into Lewis's fantasy, as celebrations are underway as he becomes the crowned king of the Lands of Wonder. He goes up, bends down to be crowned, and at that moment, Lewis the Cannery Man was dead, alongside Lewis to be king, and all the Lands of Wonder he held so dear. This was, hands down, the best part of the game. It nearly got me in tears, probably because I could relate to it so much, and other people could too. Hating where I was, and hell, the reality I was in, was something I dealt with a lot, even in some cases now. Daydreaming was an escape for me, and while I didn't take it to the extent Lewis did, I did begin to really hate the place I was in, but more so myself because I wasn't who I wanted to be in my head. I didn't even strive to be who I wanted to be in my head in reality just because I thought it was that impossible, and it was something that could only live in my head. Thankfully, those issues I had are no longer an issue anymore, but experiencing them again through this game was amazing. Friggin' A+ right here. I really regret not playing this game earlier in the year. Even after seeing it get Best Narrative at the Game Awards this year, I still didn't go out and check it out. Then again, that's probably because I don't really take the Game Awards that seriously. I played and finished this game at a friend's dorm earlier this year, and he said himself that he got more out of this game than from a feature-length film, and I completely agree with him. Which is funny, because this game clocks in at the same time of a film, around 2 hours if you're not picking at every nitty detail. The game doesn't waste your time and presents you with a straight, deep story. And if you can, I'd say pick it up. It's a bit pricey at $20, but if you decide to pick it up, you're gonna get something pretty damn memorable. So, that was certainly something, but this is my first time doing this, so there's more videos to come. Depending on what I do first, it could be a video on, let's see, Devilman Crybaby, To the Moon, and its sequel, and what do you call it? Oh, I'm already forgetting stuff, and this is the end card. And a retrospective on King's Field, the predecessor to the Dark Souls games. So, thank you for watching, and the music that I use is in the description down below. Alright, thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.